Okay, let's unpack this. Uh, Imagine a teenager who is explicitly taught just one single thing, right? Like just how to match a spoken name to a written word.
Right, just that one solitary connection.
Yeah, exactly. That is it. But then suddenly, without a single extra lesson, he starts pointing to the correct pictures when he sees those written words, and he matches the pictures back to the written words.
And then the most amazing part, he actually starts reading the words out loud.
Exactly. I mean, how exactly did his brain build a bridge he was never actually shown?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this isn't some miracle. It's a highly structured, scientifically predictable process.
Hmm.
You know, we often think of our learning as spontaneous or just driven by some mysterious internal mood.
Right, like it just happens magically.
Exactly. But there is a hidden architecture to it. Behavior is actually governed by a precise system of unseen contingencies and environmental triggers.
And that architecture is our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the precise science of human behavior, specifically the mechanics of applied behavior analysis.
And to be clear, we aren't just talking about clinical settings here. We are looking at the mechanics of your own habits, your unspoken rules, and why you do the things you do.
Right, because we want to give you, the listener, the tools to understand the actual behavioral equations running in the background of your life.
Exactly. Because behavior is a science, even when the humans involved are, well, delightfully messy. And to understand the messy stuff, we first have to understand that teenager you just mentioned.
Yeah, let's go back to him, because that is a real historical clinical case from 1971, the Sidman study from our sources today.
Yes, the classic Sidman study.
They taught him one thing, and he just derived the rest. He basically built a whole highway system in his mind from one paved road. How does that actually work mechanically?
Well, it comes down to a concept called stimulus equivalence. This is part of a broader capability we call generative learning.
Okay, and generative learning is just what it sounds like, right? Generating new skills.
Basically, yeah. It's what happens when a learner acquires a specific set of skills and then spontaneously applies them to completely novel contexts. They create connections they were never actually trained to make.
I mean, humans clearly manage to learn incredibly complex concepts without a teacher standing over us explicitly detailing every single variation, right?
Exactly. And clinically speaking, if you were analyzing this, there are three parts to this behavioral equation. The first is reflexivity.
Okay, let me break down the math of how this learning happens, because it's actually incredibly cool once you get past the jargon. Reflexivity is written out as A equals A.
Right, which is just identical matching. A picture of a cat equals that exact same picture of a cat. It seems incredibly basic, but it's the bedrock of all subsequent learning.
Right, because once you have A equals A, you can move to the next step, which is symmetry.
Exactly. Symmetry is A equals B, therefore B equals A. It's reversibility.
Right, so think about it like this. Imagine a teacher tells a child, Jill is faster than Joey. The child takes that information and spontaneously derives the symmetrical opposite.
They realize Joey is slower than Jill. Nobody explicitly taught the child that Joey was slower, but they flipped the equation entirely on their own.
Wow. And that leads us to the final, most complex piece of the puzzle, right? Transitivity.
Yes, transitivity. This is represented as A equals C. It is the ultimate aha moment in learning. And it's exactly what happened with the teenager in the 1971 study.
Okay, let me make sure I have the mechanics of this right. So if the spoken word ball equals a picture of a ball,
That is A equals B,
right, and a picture of a ball equals the written word ball,
which is B equals C.
then the learner spontaneously derives that the spoken word equals the written word. So A equals C. They connected the two endpoints without ever being shown they go together.
You've got it perfectly. The brain forms a derived relation. And here's your clinical power insight for this concept. This is a survival mechanism.
Oh, wait, a survival mechanism. How so?
Well, in behavioral science, we talk a lot about response generalization. If we had to be directly instructed on every single variation of a scenario to survive, we wouldn't make it very far.
Ah, I see. Because our environment is constantly shifting.
Exactly. Generative learning allows us to take a finite amount of training and apply it to an infinite number of real-world situations. And if I can drop an exam strategy here for anyone studying.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Let's hear it.
If you see a test question where a learner demonstrates a skill without any direct training history for that specific relation, choose transitivity or stimulus equivalence.
Oh, that's a great tip.
But you have to watch out for a common mistake. A lot of people confuse symmetry and transitivity. Just remember, symmetry is two items flipping. Transitivity requires three items connecting, A, B, and C.
That makes total sense. It actually makes me think of playing the guitar. Like if you learn a song on an acoustic guitar, the feel, the sound, the tension of the strings, they're all very specific to that moment of learning.
Right, it's a very specific stimulus environment.
Yeah, but you can pick up an electric guitar, which feels and sounds completely different, and just spontaneously play the exact same song without needing to relearn it.
Yes, your brain generalizes the response across different stimuli. That is a perfect example of response generalization. It's what makes true independence possible.
So we see this transitivity and generalization in simple objects and motor skills, like the ball or the guitar. But the most complex web we build in our brains is language.
Oh, absolutely. Every single word we use is a web of derived relations. And to achieve that kind of generative learning in human interaction, behavior analysts look at language differently than a linguist would.
Right, because communication isn't just an abstract exchange of ideas, is it?
No, it's not. Communication is a behavior. It is the set of actions controlled by the environment, just like walking or eating.
Which means it can be broken down and analyzed. I mean, I've been thinking about this in my own life. If I'm just having a normal conversation with my spouse and my responses don't perfectly match what they say,
Like if they ask you a question and you give an answer.
yeah, exactly. What exactly is happening there behaviorally? Because I'm not just echoing them and I'm not necessarily demanding anything.
To answer that, we have to look at the framework called verbal operants. There are 4 primary verbal operants that form the foundation of how we communicate.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first, and usually the first to develop in humans, is the echoic. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's repeating what is heard.
So a parent says cat, the toddler says cat.
Right. It has point-to-point correspondence with the stimulus. You hear it, you echo it. Very straightforward. The next is the mand.
And a mand is basically a demand or a request, right?
You can think of it that way, yes.
Yeah.
But what's crucial mechanically is that a mand is driven by a motivating operation, or an MO.
Okay, let's unpack that because that is a massive concept, a motivating operation.
Yeah, it means there's an internal state of deprivation or desire that makes a certain reinforcement highly valuable right at that moment.
So if a child learns to say please repeatedly until they get a toy they want, they desire the toy. So that state of wanting is the motivating operation.
Precisely. They say please because in the past, their environment selected and rewarded that specific verbal behavior by giving them the toy.
So it's not just them being polite, it's them using a highly functional tool that has worked before.
Exactly. The environment shaped the mand. Now, the third operant is the tact. This is simply labeling something you come into contact with in your environment.
Like you see a truck, you say truck, or you smell smoke, you say smoke.
Right. It is controlled by a nonverbal stimulus. So we have echoic for repeating, mand for requesting based on motivation, and tact for labeling the physical world.
Which brings us back to my question about having a normal conversation.
Right, which brings us to the fourth operant, the intraverbal. This is when you respond to someone else's verbal stimulus, but your response doesn't exactly match what they said.
Ah, so it's the core of conversation.
Exactly. If I say ready, set, and you say go, that is an intraverbal.
Yeah.
Your spouse asks a question, you provide an answer.
Here is where it gets really interesting because in the real world, these operants don't just happen in isolation, right? They stack on top of each other.
Oh, constantly. Let's walk through a scenario to see how these invisible variables control a single human response.
Let's do it.
Picture this. You are at home and you are craving ice cream. That craving is your motivating operation. You are primed for a mand. You really want it.
Okay, I'm with you. I really want the ice cream.
Then your spouse pulls a mysterious grocery bag out of the freezer and says you have to guess what kind it is. It rhymes with hunky skunky.
And I immediately reply, chunky monkey.
Yes, and that scenario perfectly illustrates what behavior analysts call multiple control.
Multiple control. So my response is an intraverbal because I'm directly responding to the spoken phrase rhymes with hunky skunky.
Right, but it is also heavily controlled by the motivating operation of your intense craving. If you didn't want ice cream, you might not have engaged with the game at all.
Oh, wow, yeah. And it's also controlled by the visual stimulus of the bag itself, right?
Exactly. It's wild to think about. Our everyday language is this complex tapestry of environmental cues, internal states of deprivation, and learned histories.
All firing simultaneously in a fraction of a second just to produce two simple words like chunky monkey.
It makes you realize that every conversation you have today is a wildly complex behavioral dance.
It really does. But this brings up a huge pivot point for us. If we understand how good behavior and effective communication are built through stimulus equivalence, mands, interverbals.
What happens when things go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Because if language is a learned behavior designed to get our needs met, then bad habits, tantrums, and even severe things like self-injury are also learned behaviors designed to get needs met, right?
Absolutely. And that is where the concept of functional analysis comes in. If you want to change a behavior, you have to become a behavioral detective.
So you can't just look at a problem behavior and guess why it's happening based on what it looks like.
Never. Functional analysis is the rigorous experimental manipulation of the environment to find the exact why behind an action. We call that why the function of the behavior.
Let's make this tangible for everyone listening. If you are listening to this deep dive right now and you find yourself doom scrolling on your phone during a really boring virtual meeting.
Why are you doing it?
Right. Behaviorally, there are 4 specific functions we have to test for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's apply those 4 functions to your doom scrolling example. First, there is attention.
So, does a behavior happen primarily to get other people to look, react, or engage?
Right. In the case of doom scrolling quietly, probably not. But a child throwing toys in a classroom, often that's for attention.
Even negative attention, right? Like a teacher yelling can be highly reinforcing if the child felt ignored.
Oh, absolutely. Negative attention is still attention. Second is escape. Does the behavior occur to avoid or delay a demand?
So, back to the meeting. Are you doom scrolling because the meeting is highly technical, it's making you anxious, and looking at social media allows your brain to escape the difficult task?
That is a very common function. Third is access, or tangible. This is when the behavior happens specifically to get a desired item or activity.
Like a toddler throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. They aren't doing it to escape, they're doing it to get access to the candy bar at the checkout lane.
Exactly. If you are doom scrolling simply because you really enjoy the videos on your feed, you are behaving for access to a tangible reinforcement.
And the fourth is alone, or automatic. This one is so fascinating to me because it removes other people from the equation entirely.
Yes, automatic reinforcement. It means the behavior happens simply because it feels good physically. There's a very clear clinical case study in our sources that illustrates this beautifully.
Oh, the Yolanda case.
Yes, a client named Yolanda was engaging in severe skin picking. It was a dangerous behavior, causing real tissue damage. But the behavior analyst didn't just guess why she was doing it.
Right, through functional analysis, they tested the environment.
And they discovered it wasn't about getting attention from caregivers, and it wasn't about escaping a task.
The investigative process here is brilliant. The behavior analyst essentially applied a heavy moisturizing lotion to Yolanda's arms.
Exactly. By making the skin smooth and hydrated, they completely removed the dry, flaky texture that Yolanda enjoyed picking at.
And almost immediately, the picking behavior dropped dramatically.
They extinguished the physical sensation, which proved unequivocally that the behavior was maintained by automatic sensory reinforcement.
Which brings us to perhaps the most vital takeaway of behavioral science. We must never judge a behavior by its topography.
Right, topography is what the behavior looks like on the surface.
But only by its function, which is what the behavior actually achieves in the environment. Topography versus function. That distinction changes everything about how you interact with people.
It is the ultimate clinical power insight. Let's say you have 2 different students in a classroom who both exhibit the exact same topography. They both grab their pencils and hurl them across the room.
It looks identical.
But student A throws the pencil because they want the teacher to come over, scold them, and engage with them. They want the attention.
Okay, and student B.
Student B throws the pencil because they hate the writing assignment, and they know throwing objects will get them sent to the hallway, allowing them to escape the work.
Wow. Yeah. So if you treat the topography as the problem, you will fail.
Miserably.
Yeah.
If the teacher uses a blanket punishment and puts both students in the hallway, they have inadvertently rewarded student B.
They just gave that student the exact escape they were functionally seeking.
Exactly. The intervention must be tailored entirely to the function. For student A, you might ignore the thrown pencil and give them heavy attention when they're sitting quietly.
And for student B, you might make the writing task easier or teach them to politely ask for a break.
Which removes the need to throw the pencil to escape. The treatment for those 2 identical-looking behaviors is completely opposite.
Okay, so the science on the whiteboard is incredibly clean. We have our equations, our operands, our 4 functions.
But taking this clean science off the whiteboard and dropping it into the messy, chaotic reality of human lives.
That is a totally different ballgame. Applying this science requires incredibly strict boundaries.
It does. In applied behavior analysis, ethical practice is not just a set of arbitrary rules handed down by a board. It is directly linked to clinical effectiveness.
Right, if you compromise the ethics, the intervention itself falls apart. Let's talk about why that is, starting with the issue of dual relationships.
Oh, that's a huge red flag in the field.
Yeah, imagine two colleagues who begin a romantic relationship, and suddenly one is promoted to be the direct clinical supervisor of the other. It sounds like standard workplace drama.
But in a behavioral setting, it destroys the objectivity needed to monitor treatment integrity.
Because you cannot accurately evaluate the effectiveness of a behavioral intervention if your judgment is clouded by a personal relationship with the person implementing it.
It is a severe conflict of interest that ultimately hurts the client. But the ethical dilemmas get much heavier than office politics.
Yeah, let's look at that complex case study involving an Asian family from our sources.
Right. So a behavior analyst is assigned to a home where a 15-year-old is severely addicted to video games and becomes physically aggressive when the games are restricted.
And there's also an 11-year-old in the home who is actively losing vital communication skills.
The father is absent due to work, and the mother is experiencing severe mental health distress, even expressing suicidal ideation.
And on top of all of this complexity, the mother speaks no English and can only communicate with the behavior analyst through a translator. The pressure in that room would be overwhelming.
Absolutely. And from an ethical and clinical standpoint, the mechanics of translation become terrifying.
Think about it. A behavior analyst might need the mother to implement a highly technical procedure, like differential reinforcement, to manage the 15-year-old's aggression.
Right, which means reinforcing one very specific positive behavior while strictly ignoring the aggressive behavior.
If the translator, who has no background in behavioral science, slightly misinterprets the timing or the nuance of that instruction,
The mother might inadvertently reinforce the aggression instead. The treatment could actively make the teenager more violent.
that is the immense ethical burden the practitioner carries. They have to navigate profound cultural barriers, ensure the mother gets immediate psychiatric emergency help.
And somehow establish a flawless, reliable chain of communication to implement a life-altering behavioral plan. If the ethics slip, the family is put in danger.
There's another boundary issue that I think anyone in a caregiving or supportive role can relate to.
Which one is that?
Imagine a behavior analyst trying to conduct clinical sessions in a home, but the mother of the client is so overwhelmed that she spends 90% of the therapy time crying.
Unloading her personal trauma. Treating the behavior analyst like a best friend or a co-parent.
Right. As a compassionate human being, your immediate instinct is to comfort her, to be that friend. But as a clinician, you are there to provide a medical necessity for the child.
Maintaining that boundary without being callous is a massive ethical tightrope. The clinician has to compassionately redirect the mother, perhaps referring her to counseling.
While fiercely protecting the clinical time dedicated to the child's behavioral development. Which brings me to something I really want to get your perspective on.
Sure, go ahead.
So, what do you do when a desperate parent comes to a behavior analyst and demands a specific treatment because they read a compelling emotional story about it online?
But the analyst knows mechanically that it is absolute pseudoscience.
Exactly. What happens then?
That is one of the hardest conversations a practitioner will ever have. But the entire field of behavior analysis rests on empiricism.
So the rules are pretty strict there.
Uncompromising. The ethics code is clear. Behavior analysts must use evidence-based procedures. They are ethically bound to politely but firmly reject fad treatments.
Regardless of how much the parents are begging for them or how desperate the situation is.
Exactly.
And some of these fads are truly dangerous. Things like facilitated communication, which has been entirely debunked.
Or parents giving children miracle mineral solution, which is literally industrial bleach marketed as a cure for behavioral disorders.
It is tragic how vulnerable families can be preyed upon by the internet.
It is. But the behavior analyst's allegiance must remain to the scientific validity of the treatment.
Because compromising on science to appease a parent might feel empathetic in the moment, it might avoid conflict, but it ultimately harms the well-being of the client.
The ethical choice is very often the most difficult one to execute.
It really reframes how you look at the profession, doesn't it? It is not just sitting at a table running flashcards.
Not at all. It is navigating profound human vulnerability with absolute scientific rigor.
Okay, let's pull all of this together because we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
Whether it is a toddler spontaneously deriving the relationship between a picture of a ball and a real ball through stimulus equivalence.
Or you navigating a complex social interaction with your spouse using intraverbals and motivating operations.
Our behavior is not random. It is a highly intricate, measurable tapestry of learned contingencies and environmental reinforcements.
And understanding these underlying mechanisms truly gives you a new lens through which to view the world around you.
It allows you to step back and ask why the people in your life are acting the way they do.
Exactly. When you start looking for the function of a behavior, whether your coworker is trying to gain attention or your child is trying to escape a situation.
Or you are seeking access to something tangible.
Right. When you look for the function rather than simply reacting to the topography of what they're doing,
Yeah.
you become much more effective and, frankly, much more empathetic in your interactions.
It changes everything when you stop reacting to what people do and start responding to why they do it.
It really does.
Yeah.
And listen, if this helped you follow behavioral intelligence, share this deep dive with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review.
That is how we keep the lights on and keep bringing you these insights.
Exactly. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you. Because at Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. You can find us at www.amethysttherapyservices.com or email us at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
But unpacking all of this today also leaves me with a thought that is a little unsettling, and I want to leave you, the listener, with this as well to mull over.
What's that?
If our daily actions, the comfortable habits we fall into, and even the very vocabulary we use are constantly being shaped by these unseen environmental reinforcements and spontaneous derivations,
Right.
how much of your routine today was truly a free choice, and how much was simply your brain perfectly executing a behavior it was silently trained to perform?